The trash was just out by the curb when the yelling started. The furious voice could be heard echoing down the street, accusing someone of setting trash on fire like it was an act of war against the entire HOA. Shock rippled through the cleaning crew, who had been quietly doing their job until everything suddenly spiraled out of control. What began as a simple neighborhood disagreement quickly ignited into a dramatic meltdown involving flaming trash cans, a luxury car soaked with an unforgettable substance, and a retaliation plan so wild it felt ripped from a suburban nightmare. It's the kind of situation that happens when a neighborhood Karen meets her match and things get seriously messy. It all started on what should have been a routine trash day. I had taken the bins out the night before, like always, lined them up neatly by the curb just as the HOA guidelines specified. I wasn't trying to make a statement or get on anyone's nerves, just doing my part to keep the neighborhood looking decent, but apparently that was more than enough to rile Karen up. I first noticed the tension when I saw her pacing near her front porch, glaring in my direction with this fiery intensity that instantly made my stomach tighten. She wasn't just annoyed. This was personal. The next thing I knew, she marched over, clipboard in hand, and started peppering me with questions about why my bins weren't exactly 3 inches from the curb, as if I'd committed some kind of felony. She rattled off the HOA rules with the kind of fervor usually reserved for courtroom prosecutors, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning calm. I tried to explain that the trash trucks had been delayed that week and I'd been extra careful to follow every rule. But Karen wasn't having it. She wasn't listening. She only saw what she wanted to see, someone disrespecting the neighborhood standards she held so sacred. Before I could finish, she pulled out her phone and started snapping photos of my bins like she was gathering evidence for a criminal trial. I felt like a suspect in some suburban crime drama, and all I'd done was put out my trash. What really stunned me was how quickly this small disagreement snowballed. Word got around that Karen was actively monitoring my trash habits. Every day, she appeared on the street with her camera or binoculars, taking notes and chatting with neighbors about my alleged violations. At first, it was annoying, the kind of petty pestering you expect from the overly enthusiastic HOA member. But then things escalated. Flyers appeared on my door, warning of penalties for repeated offenses. Official-looking letters arrived, citing violations I didn't even know existed. The tension in the neighborhood grew palpable, as if my trash bins had become a symbol of some deeper rebellion. I couldn't believe how something so trivial had turned into a full-blown feud, and I certainly didn't expect that this was just the beginning of a war that would soon engulf the whole street. Karen was not your average neighborhood busybody. From the moment she moved in, it was clear she saw herself as the unofficial ruler of the HOA kingdom. She had this way of carrying herself that made you think she had inherited some invisible crown, one that gave her the right to patrol every lawn, scrutinize every mailbox, and dictate exactly how everyone should live. Her obsession with control went far beyond simple community pride. It was personal. She thrived on enforcing rules that seemed designed not to unite the neighborhood, but to keep everyone under her thumb. She was always impeccably dressed, even on the hottest summer days, like she was prepared for a photo shoot or some kind of official inspection. Her designer sunglasses were her signature, reflecting the glare of anyone who dared cross her path. The clipboard she carried was practically a fashion accessory, filled with handwritten notes and printed regulations she seemed to know by heart. She didn't just care about the big things like lawn care or parking violations. No, she focused on every tiny detail, the exact height of curtains, the color of welcome mats, the placement of garden gnomes. If it didn't meet her standards, you could expect a stern letter or an intimidating visit. Neighbors whispered about her behind closed doors, sharing stories of how Karen had gotten entire families fined over backyard decorations or petty complaints about children playing too loudly. But no one dared confront her directly. She had a way of making people feel small and guilty, wielding the HOA rules like a weapon. She'd appear at community meetings with her perfectly rehearsed speeches, framing herself as the protector of property values and neighborhood safety. Behind her polished smile was a ruthless determination to maintain her grip on power. Yet, beneath all that confidence, there was something more unsettling. Occasionally, you'd catch her glancing at a house a little too long, as if she wasn't just checking for violations but staking a claim. It was like she saw herself not just as the guardian of the neighborhood, but as its true owner. And when someone like me moved in, someone who didn't fit her carefully crafted mold, that sense of ownership turned into outright hostility. Karen was not just an HOA president. She was a force of nature determined to remind everyone who really ran the show. The day Karen decided to conduct what she called a trash inspection Felt like stepping onto a stage in a bizarre play where I was both the lead actor and the unwitting villain. She arrived with all the seriousness of a government inspector, clipboard clutched tightly in one hand and a camera dangling from her neck. Her eyes scanned my property like a hawk looking for its next prey. I thought maybe she was joking at first, but the steely determination in her step told me this was going to be anything but a friendly neighborhood check-in. She approached my driveway with deliberate strides, measuring tape in hand as if she was about to inspect a crime scene. Karen's voice was loud and confident as she barked out questions about the exact placement of my trash cans, the timing of their placement, and even the brand of garbage bags I used. It was clear she had memorized every clause in the HOA handbook, and she was ready to enforce every single one. What struck me was how her tone was less about community care and more about control, as if she was proving a point to anyone watching. Her camera flashed repeatedly as she snapped photos from angles I hadn't even considered. I felt invaded, like a private moment had been turned into public spectacle. Karen wasn't just documenting violations. She was creating a dossier, a record that she could use to escalate her campaign against me. The neighbors nearby peeked through curtains, some whispering encouragement, others clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding. Despite my attempts to stay calm and explain that I was following the rules, Karen cut me off repeatedly, dismissing my words like they were irrelevant. At one point, she even compared my trash placement to some imaginary threat to property values, her voice rising with self-righteous indignation. Her performance was so over the top that I couldn't help but wonder if she was rehearsing for some sort of suburban reality TV show. By the time she finished her inspection, I realized this was far from just about trash cans. It was about power. The way she wielded those little rules made it clear she enjoyed the control it gave her. I could only brace myself for what was coming next, knowing that this inspection was just the opening act in a drama that would soon engulf my entire life. My cleaning crew showed up the day after Karen's infamous trash inspection, completely unaware of the drama they were stepping into. They were just here to do their job, tidy up the yard, clear out any leftover debris, and make sure the property looked presentable. They didn't expect to become key players in a neighborhood war, but as soon as they pulled up, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen was already outside, standing in her usual spot, clipboard in hand, watching like a hawk, waiting for her next opportunity to pounce. At first, my crew tried to keep things professional. They greeted her politely, but Karen barely acknowledged them, her eyes scanning every move with suspicion. She started questioning the smallest details, the way the trash bags were tied, whether the broom had proper bristles, if the trash cans were positioned just so. It was clear that this wasn't about cleanliness anymore. This was personal. She was looking for any excuse to escalate, and my crew had just become the new targets. The day quickly took a surreal turn. Karen suddenly pointed at the trash bins, claiming they were still a violation despite having been approved the day before. When my crew tried to explain that they were simply following instructions, Karen's tone shifted to something colder, sharper. She accused them of deliberately ignoring the rules, almost as if she expected sabotage. My guys exchanged confused glances but tried to stay calm and focused on their work. They had no idea that their simple act of cleaning would soon spark one of the wildest revenge moments our neighborhood had ever seen. Later that afternoon, after the crew had finished, things escalated in ways none of us could have predicted. Karen, frustrated and furious, decided to take matters into her own hands. She set fire to one of the trash cans, right there on the curb. The smoke billowed quickly, sending neighbors rushing to their windows and phones. My cleaning crew, caught in the chaos, rushed over to put out the fire with what they could find, but the damage was done. The street was buzzing, and the neighborhood had officially become a battleground. From that moment on, my cleaning crew wasn't just there to tidy up. They became the unexpected heroes and, somehow, the perfect storm for the revenge that would soon follow. The moment the trash can caught fire was something straight out of a nightmare. It started with a flicker, just a small flame licking the edge of the plastic bin, but before anyone could react, the fire roared to life, sending thick black smoke curling into the sky. Karen stood nearby with a look of fierce satisfaction, as if she had just won some twisted victory. The smell of burning plastic filled the air, and neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the sight and sound of chaos, disrupting the usual quiet of our street. My cleaning crew acted fast, instinct kicking in as they grabbed buckets of water and anything else they could find to douse the flames. The fire was stubborn, though, and the smoke was choking, making it difficult to breathe. We all scrambled to contain the blaze before it spread to nearby shrubs or vehicles. I could see Karen watching with a smug expression, completely unfazed by the danger she'd created. It was like she wanted to watch the world burn, at least my little corner of it. People from across the street were filming on their phones, capturing the madness that had erupted over what should have been a simple trash dispute. Some neighbors whispered in disbelief, while others shook their heads, muttering about how far Karen had gone this time. The fire department was called, and it felt like hours before the sirens finally cut through the tension, bringing a much-needed sense of order. When the firefighters arrived, they quickly put out the remnants of the fire, but the damage was done. The charred remains of the trash can sat as a grim reminder of how quickly things had escalated. Karen refused to take responsibility, instead blaming me and my crew for provoking her. Her accusations were loud and dramatic, drawing an audience that seemed more interested in the spectacle than the facts. The whole neighborhood was buzzing with disbelief. How did a disagreement over trash cans end with a fire in the street? People who had never taken sides before were suddenly picking sides, and the atmosphere was electric with tension. My cleaning crew, though shaken, stood their ground. They knew they hadn't started this, but they were ready to face whatever came next. The fire wasn't just about trash anymore, it was the spark that ignited a war no one saw coming. After the fire was finally extinguished, the smoke had barely cleared when it became obvious this was no ordinary neighborhood spat. The trash can may have stopped burning, but the tension was still smoldering between Karen and everyone involved. The damage wasn't just physical. The sense of calm that usually settled over the street after trash day was shattered, replaced by whispers, suspicious glances, and an undercurrent of hostility that didn't seem ready to fade. Karen, as expected, refused to back down. She painted herself as the victim, accusing me and my crew of provoking her and deliberately ignoring neighborhood standards. Her voice was loud, commanding, filled with indignation that only seemed to fuel the fire of her outrage. She made a scene at every opportunity, showing up unannounced and waving the scorched trash can like a trophy, demanding apologies and reparations. To her, this was a battle she intended to win at any cost. The cleaning crew was rattled, but determined not to let Karen's antics intimidate them. They kept their heads down and continued their work, even as they faced pointed questions and sideways looks from neighbors who were caught in the middle. Some neighbors sympathized with us, but others were clearly influenced by Karen's relentless campaign of persuasion, which painted my team as troublemakers rather than victims. It was frustrating to see how quickly the narrative was twisting out of control. The fire department's visit had brought a temporary reprieve, but the real battle was just beginning. Official letters arrived from the HOA demanding restitution for the damaged trash can and threatening fines for property damage and disturbing community peace. It felt surreal to be held responsible for something started by Karen herself. I consulted with legal advisors, but the constant barrage of complaints and demands was exhausting. The stress was piling up for everyone involved. Meanwhile, the neighborhood atmosphere changed dramatically. Social gatherings became tense, casual hellos turned into awkward silences, and even kids sensed the strain among adults. People took sides openly, and the small community that once prided itself on friendliness was fracturing. It became clear that what started as a minor trash dispute had turned into a full-scale neighborhood war, where no one was safe from suspicion or judgment. Through it all, I realized this wasn't just about a trash can. It was about power, control, and the lengths one person was willing to go to maintain it. The fire was only the beginning, a symbol of a conflict that was about to consume us all. When it became clear that Karen wasn't going to let the trash fire go unanswered, my cleaning crew decided it was time to send a message that she wouldn't forget. We weren't looking to escalate the drama recklessly, but after everything she had put us through, it felt like justice demanded something bold. The opportunity came one afternoon when Karen's pristine BMW was parked in her driveway, gleaming in the sunlight as if daring anyone to challenge her control over the neighborhood. That car had become a symbol of her power, her untouchable status, and it was about to become the stage for a very different kind of statement. The crew gathered quietly, knowing the risks but feeling the weight of months of harassment and absurd confrontations. The plan was simple but effective. Using a mixture of materials that would guarantee a lasting and unmistakable mark, they soaked Karen's luxury car with a substance that was impossible to ignore and impossible to wash away quickly. The moment was a mixture of nervous anticipation and grim satisfaction. This was more than just revenge. It was a way to reclaim some dignity and push back against the bullying that had engulfed our lives. Karen's reaction was immediate and explosive. She screamed like a woman possessed, pacing around her soaked BMW and slapping the hood in disbelief and fury. The neighbors gathered at their windows and on porches, watching the scene unfold like a live theater production. Her voice carried down the street as she shouted about decency, respect, and how she would make whoever did this pay dearly. But beneath all the noise, it was clear that she was rattled, caught off guard by an attack that hit her where she least expected. The incident quickly became the talk of the neighborhood. People who had been on the fence about Karen's behavior found themselves siding with us, admiring the cleverness of the response. Social media exploded with posts, pictures, and videos of the soaked BMW, and the story took on a life of its own. What began as a small trash dispute had evolved into a spectacle that no one could ignore. For my cleaning crew, it was more than just a prank or a moment of payback. It was a reminder that even the most entitled Karens have limits and that sometimes standing up to them requires getting your hands dirty literally. The soaked BMW wasn't just a statement, it was a turning point. Karen's reaction to the soaked BMW was a spectacle unlike anything I had ever witnessed. The moment she saw her luxury car drenched in that unforgettable substance, her calm facade shattered completely. Her screams echoed down the street, sharp and furious, cutting through the usual neighborhood quiet like a storm breaking loose. She paced frantically around the vehicle, slapping the hood and yelling at anyone within earshot about the disrespect and the damage done to her prized possession. It was clear she felt not just violated, but publicly humiliated. Her dramatic outburst quickly drew a crowd of curious neighbors. Some peered cautiously from behind curtains, while others gathered on their porches, whispering and exchanging shocked looks. The spectacle was so absurd that even people who had long been on Karen's side couldn't help but question just how far this had gone. Her words were loud and relentless, filled with threats about calling the police, pressing charges, and making sure whoever was responsible paid dearly. But the fire in her eyes was tinged with panic, as if she hadn't anticipated that anyone would dare push back so effectively. At the same time, Karen turned to social media as her battlefield of choice. She posted furious videos and rants, trying to rally support from her followers and anyone who would listen. Her live streams were filled with her side of the story, dripping with outrage and demanding justice. But rather than sympathy, her posts attracted ridicule and disbelief from people who saw her meltdown for what it was, a Karen completely losing control. Memes started popping up overnight, mocking her over-the-top reaction and celebrating the soaked BMW as a symbol of neighborhood justice served. The online attention only amplified the neighborhood tension. Some residents who had been quietly uncomfortable with Karen's authoritarian style now found the courage to speak up. Others doubled down on their support for her, unwilling to accept the idea that the HOA queen had been taken down a notch. What had been a private dispute spilled into the public domain, turning friends into foes and neighbors into spectators. Through it all, Karen's fury remained relentless, but so did the growing feeling that her grip on power was slipping. Her social media storms raged, but the tide of public opinion was turning. The soaked BMW incident had done more than just mark her car, it had marked the beginning of the end for Karen's reign in our neighborhood. The soaked BMW incident quickly became the spark that split the neighborhood right down the middle. Before long, conversations in the grocery store aisles, casual chats during morning jogs, and even neighborhood barbecues were dominated by heated debates about who was right and who was wrong. What had started as a petty dispute over trash cans had exploded into a full-blown community conflict where everyone felt compelled to pick a side. On one hand, there were those who admired the boldness of the cleaning crew's response. They saw it as a long overdue pushback against Karen's overbearing control and relentless policing of the smallest details. These neighbors were tired of living in fear of receiving violation notices for harmless lawn decorations or being publicly shamed for trivial things. To them, soaking Karen's luxury car wasn't just justified. It was a symbol of reclaiming freedom from a tyrant who had ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist for too long. They shared stories of their own experiences with Karen's relentless inspections and fines, bonding over the common frustration that had been building for years. On the other side, loyal supporters of Karen insisted that her actions were necessary to maintain the neighborhood's standards and property values. They argued that rules were rules and that everyone had to follow them, no matter how inconvenient or seemingly petty. To them, the soaked BMW was an act of vandalism and disrespect, proof that the cleaning crew had crossed a line and were now the troublemakers. These neighbors feared that if Karen's authority was challenged successfully, the community would fall into chaos and decline, losing the carefully curated image that attracted them in the first place. This division created an electric atmosphere. Casual greetings turned cold, invitations to social gatherings were rescinded, and neighbors who once exchanged friendly waves now avoided each other altogether. The street that had once felt like a close-knit community began to resemble a battleground, with invisible lines drawn on lawns and in driveways. Some residents tried to mediate, urging calm and understanding, but the wounds ran deep and emotions were raw. As the sides hardened, the conflict seeped into neighborhood meetings, turning them into arenas of argument rather than cooperation. What was once a forum for community decisions became a stage for airing grievances and rallying support. The soaked BMW was no longer just a car. It was the symbol of a fractured neighborhood struggling to find its way back to peace. Karen wielded the HOA rulebook like a weapon, and it quickly became clear that she wasn't interested in fairness or community harmony. Every page, every clause, was twisted to serve her own agenda, turning what should have been guidelines into tools of intimidation. Minor infractions that no one else noticed became the center of her relentless crusade. Whether it was a flower bed slightly overgrown or a mailbox painted the wrong shade, Karen pounced with a fury that made even the smallest mistakes feel like acts of rebellion. Her enforcement style was not about building a better neighborhood, it was about asserting dominance. She used the rules selectively, targeting those who dared question her authority or simply didn't fit into her narrow vision of perfection. Letters arrived with alarming frequency, each one more threatening than the last, filled with formal language that masked the petty nature of the complaints. The fines she imposed seemed less about maintaining standards and more about punishing anyone who stood in her way. What made Karen's use of the rules especially effective was her thorough knowledge of every regulation, no matter how obscure. She could quote sections verbatim and produce official-looking documents that convinced many neighbors she was an unstoppable force of order. People who tried to reason with her often found themselves overwhelmed by her legal jargon and unyielding stance. Her reputation for being unforgiving spread quickly, and many residents chose silence over confrontation, fearing the consequences of even the smallest misstep. Yet beneath the surface, there was an undeniable absurdity to Karen's approach. Some violations she cited were so trivial they seemed invented. Complaints about the exact angle of a garden gnome's hat or the precise number of leaves allowed on a tree gave neighbors the sense that the rules were being weaponized rather than applied. It wasn't about community standards anymore. It was about control, about keeping everyone on edge and in line. Despite growing pushback, Karen doubled down. She held impromptu inspections, often appearing unannounced, catching neighbors off guard. Her relentless pursuit created an atmosphere of tension, turning what should have been a peaceful neighborhood into a place where every choice felt scrutinized. The HOA rules, once designed to protect property values and community spirit, had become Karen's personal arsenal, and anyone who crossed her faced the full weight of her wrath. The emergency HOA meeting Karen called was like stepping into a courtroom drama without the lawyers, but with all the tension and shouting you could imagine. The community center was packed beyond capacity, with neighbors squeezing into every available seat and even standing along the walls. The usual casual atmosphere of these gatherings was gone, replaced by a charged energy that made it clear this was more than just a routine discussion about neighborhood rules. Karen was ready to lay out her case with the confidence of a prosecutor presenting the closing argument in a high-stakes trial. She arrived with her evidence in tow, carrying poster boards plastered with photos of my property, the trash cans, and even pictures of the soaked BMW, which she called proof of deliberate defiance. Her voice was loud and unwavering as she pointed to each photo and document, weaving a story that painted me as a reckless, disrespectful neighbor who threatened the very fabric of the community. Her narrative was rehearsed, every word chosen to provoke outrage and rally support. Many neighbors listened with rapt attention, some nodding along, while others exchanged skeptical glances. It felt less like a fair hearing and more like a performance designed to sway public opinion. As Karen spoke, she laid out a timeline of violations, from the initial trash complaints to the fiery trash can incident, and finally the soaked BMW. Each event was presented as evidence of a pattern of disrespect and lawlessness. She warned that if I wasn't held accountable, the entire neighborhood would suffer declining property values and a breakdown of community standards. Her rhetoric was dramatic and convincing to many, especially those who had grown tired of what they saw as chaos and disregard for the rules. When it came time for questions, the room erupted. Some neighbors voiced concerns about Karen's aggressive tactics and questioned whether the punishments were proportionate. Others insisted that rules were rules and that anyone who ignored them had to be held responsible. The discussion quickly devolved into heated arguments, with voices raised and tempers flaring. I tried to speak up, to offer my side of the story, but was often interrupted or dismissed. The meeting ended without resolution, but with a clear message. The neighborhood was deeply divided, and the feud that started with trash had become a full-scale battle for control. The soaked BMW and the burning trash can were no longer just incidents, they were symbols of a conflict that threatened to tear the community apart. Through all the chaos of the HOA meeting and the endless accusations, I kept trying to stay calm. It wasn't easy when Karen's voice cut through the room like a knife, and neighbors glared as if I was the enemy. I knew that losing my temper would only give her more ammunition. So instead, I focused on the facts, the paperwork, and the truth. I wanted to show everyone that this wasn't about disrespect or rebellion, it was about standing up to unreasonable bullying. When I finally got a chance to speak, I laid out everything carefully. I explained how I had followed every rule I was aware of, how I had tried to communicate calmly, and how Karen's accusations were not only exaggerated but sometimes completely false. I pointed out the ways she had twisted the rules to fit her vendetta, using minor infractions to punish rather than protect the neighborhood. I wanted the community to see that this wasn't personal for me, but it had become personal for her, and that wasn't right. Some neighbors listened and nodded, clearly surprised by the side of the story they hadn't heard. Others were skeptical, caught in the web of fear and loyalty Karen had spun over the years. It was frustrating because I knew facts alone wouldn't change everything. Karen's grip on the neighborhood was strong, and fear of crossing her kept many silent. But I hoped that by staying calm and presenting my case clearly, I could chip away at that power. I also made it clear that I wasn't interested in escalating the conflict. I wanted peace, for the neighborhood to feel like home again, not a place ruled by fear and petty feuds. I suggested that we find common ground, work together to improve the community, and respect each other's boundaries. It was a simple request, but in that room, it felt revolutionary. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me quietly. They thanked me for speaking up, shared their own frustrations, and expressed hope that maybe things could change. That small encouragement meant a lot. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, even if it sometimes felt that way. The drama wasn't over, but my calm in the storm had planted a seed. Karen might have started this war with trash and fire, but I was ready to show that reason and patience could be just as powerful weapons in this fight. After the dust had settled from the HOA meeting, my cleaning crew finally found their voice. Up until then, they had stayed quiet, focused on the work, and trying not to get caught in the middle of what felt like an endless neighborhood feud. But the way Karen had treated them, and the fire she had set, had left a mark. They needed to share what they had seen and experienced, because the truth was far more complicated than the neighborhood gossip suggested. One afternoon, after finishing their usual rounds, they sat down with me and started opening up. They talked about how Karen's behavior went beyond just petty complaints. It was clear she had made it her mission to intimidate and control anyone who didn't follow her strict vision of what the neighborhood should be. They described how she'd watch them while they worked, scrutinizing every movement as if expecting them to slip up. There were moments when they felt less like employees and more like targets under surveillance. What surprised me most was their honesty about the soaked BMW incident. They admitted it was a calculated response to months of harassment, not something done lightly or out of anger, but a carefully thought-out way to make a point. They knew it would be messy, embarrassing, and irreversible. Still, they felt it was necessary to show Karen that her behavior had consequences and that she couldn't keep acting with impunity. The crew also shared their frustration about being caught in the middle of a community torn apart by one person's need for control. Some neighbors had turned against them, assuming they were troublemakers rather than workers simply doing their job. Others sent quiet thanks or even left little notes of support. That mix of reactions weighed heavily on them. It was a reminder that in this conflict, there were no simple heroes or villains, just people trying to do their best amid chaos. Hearing their stories helped me understand the human cost of this neighborhood war. It wasn't just about trash cans and fines anymore. It was about respect, dignity, and standing up against bullying in any form. The cleaning crew became more than just employees. They became allies, brave enough to push back when it mattered most. Their courage in sharing their side gave me hope that maybe, together, we could start healing the fractures Karen had caused. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the strongest messages. As the battle between Karen and me raged on, whispers began to spread about the secrets she was desperate to keep hidden behind her perfectly manicured lawns and clipped hedges. It didn't take long for the neighborhood grapevine to reveal things Karen hoped would never see the light of day. Stories surfaced about her lavish spending, far beyond what most residents could imagine, funded in part by the very HOA fees she wielded so ruthlessly as a weapon against others. People started talking about how she often broke the rules she so zealously enforced, flaunting regulations with an arrogance that made even longtime neighbors uneasy. Rumors spread about late-night parties at her house, gatherings that clashed with the community's quiet atmosphere. Some neighbors mentioned seeing luxury cars come and go at odd hours, contradicting her public image as the tireless watchdog of order. Others recalled moments when Karen's yard decorations didn't quite match the strict guidelines she demanded everyone else follow. It became clear that her obsession with control was as much about preserving her own image as it was about enforcing rules. The most unsettling whispers were about how Karen had used her position to silence dissent. Neighbors who questioned her actions or resisted her fines found themselves suddenly facing a barrage of complaints and citations. It felt less like a community and more like a game where Karen held all the cards. Her power was not just in the rules but in the fear she instilled, and the secrets she hid only made her grip tighter. As these secrets leaked out, the neighborhood began to shift. Some residents who had been loyal or neutral started to distance themselves, no longer willing to turn a blind eye to Karen's hypocrisy. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect HOA president began to crack, revealing a woman who played by her own rules and expected everyone else to follow suit without question. This growing awareness gave those of us opposing her new strength and hope. Karen's carefully hidden life wasn't just gossip. It was proof that the tyranny she imposed on the neighborhood was fueled by double standards and self-interest. The revelations didn't just tarnish her reputation, they exposed the true cost of unchecked power in a community built on trust and respect. What Karen didn't realize was that once those secrets were out, her throne was far less secure than she believed. The moment someone captured the soaked BMW incident on video, the entire neighborhood's perspective shifted overnight. What had been whispered about in hushed conversations suddenly exploded into full-blown public spectacle. The footage quickly made its way onto social media, shared and reshared by neighbors, friends, and strangers who couldn't believe such a bizarre scene had played out in an otherwise quiet suburb. The image of Karen's luxury car drenched in that unforgettable substance was impossible to ignore, and the video told a story far more vivid than any rumor or argument ever could. Views skyrocketed within hours, and the neighborhood became the center of attention in local online forums and neighborhood chat groups. People who had been unsure where to stand now had evidence right in front of them, and many found themselves cheering quietly for the cleaning crew's bold move. It was as if the video gave a voice to the frustration that had been building for years, frustration over Karen's relentless policing and the fear she instilled in anyone who dared step out of line. At the same time, the video sparked a wave of online commentary, memes, and jokes. Social media users from all over joined in, turning the soaked BMW into a symbol of neighborhood justice and the ultimate Karen meltdown. The incident was dissected and discussed with a mix of humor and disbelief, turning what had once been a private feud into a viral phenomenon. The story took on a life of its own, far beyond the cul-de-sac where it had started. Karen's attempts to control the narrative through her own social media accounts only fueled the fire. Her angry posts and live rants were met with ridicule and viral responses that exposed her escalating meltdown to an even wider audience. Instead of quieting the storm, her online presence became the perfect fuel for the growing backlash against her. Every post seemed to confirm the neighborhood's worst suspicions about her overreach and obsession with control. The video also gave others courage to speak out. Neighbors who had stayed silent for fear of Karen's retaliation began sharing their own stories of unreasonable fines and harassment. The flood of support helped to crack the hold she had over the community, revealing her as less a respected leader and more a bully hiding behind rules. What started as a simple video of a soaked car had become a catalyst for change, shaking the neighborhood to its core and shifting the balance of power in ways no one expected. Karen's meltdown didn't stay confined to our little neighborhood. It spilled over into the vast, unpredictable world of social media, where it quickly became a spectacle for thousands of viewers. She took to her online platforms with the same ferocity she wielded in person, posting angry videos and lengthy rants trying to defend her actions and rally support. But instead of sympathy, she found herself drowning in ridicule and mockery. Her followers began to question her behavior and new audiences tuned in not to support, but to watch the unraveling of a woman losing control. Her live streams became a stage for dramatic outbursts, where she alternated between sobbing about injustice and shouting threats at anyone who dared oppose her. Her frantic energy was exhausting to watch, but it also made her a magnet for internet trolls and meme creators. Social media quickly transformed her soaked BMW incident into a viral symbol of Karen's downfall. Memes flooded timelines everywhere, exaggerating her reactions and highlighting the absurdity of her crusade against a trash dispute. The humor was sharp and relentless, turning her into a cautionary tale for entitled behavior. This online backlash did more than entertain, it shifted the neighborhood's power dynamics. People who once felt intimidated by Karen's authority found strength in the collective laughter and outrage shared by thousands of strangers. The support coming from outside the community helped neighbors speak up in ways they hadn't dared before. Karen's digital meltdown showed everyone just how isolated she had become, trapped in her own world of control while the rest of us watched her implode in real time. Despite the growing storm, Karen refused to back down. She doubled down on her social media efforts, trying to spin the story in her favor and paint herself as the victim of a targeted campaign. But with every post, her credibility eroded further. Instead of controlling the narrative, she became the subject of viral jokes and harsh criticism. Her online persona, once polished and authoritative, now resembled a caricature of rage and desperation. For the neighborhood, watching Karen's social media meltdown was both cathartic and surreal. It was proof that the grip of power could slip quickly when faced with collective resistance, especially in the age of the internet. The soaked BMW was no longer just a car. It was the spark that ignited a digital rebellion against a woman who took herself far too seriously and forgot what community really meant. After the chaos of the soaked BMW and the fiery trash can, it was clear that the neighborhood needed more than just damage control, it needed healing. The physical cleanup was the easiest part. My cleaning crew worked tirelessly to remove the remnants of the fire and scrub away the stains on Karen's car as best they could. They repaired fences, tidied up yards, and tried to restore a sense of normalcy to a street that had felt anything but normal for weeks. But the emotional cleanup was a different story altogether. Neighbors were on edge. The tension that had built up over months didn't disappear overnight. Casual conversations were laced with awkward pauses, and people who once smiled and waved now avoided eye contact. The neighborhood felt fractured, as if the sense of community had been shattered into pieces that didn't quite fit back together. It was a painful reminder that when trust breaks down, even the simplest acts like taking out the trash can become sources of conflict. Recognizing the need for reconciliation, some residents stepped forward to organize gatherings meant to bring people together. Barbecues, block parties, and informal meetups started to appear on calendars, designed to rebuild relationships and remind everyone why they had chosen to live in this community in the first place. At these events, stories were shared, apologies made, and laughter began to return. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a start. For me, the healing process involved more than just social events. It meant having honest conversations with neighbors who had supported Karen or remained silent. I listened to their concerns, acknowledged their fears about property values and neighborhood standards, and tried to find common ground. Slowly, the walls between us started to come down. We realized that, while Karen's tactics had caused division, most of us still wanted the same things: a safe, pleasant place to live, where everyone felt respected. Karen herself became a cautionary figure rather than a leader. Her downfall served as a powerful lesson about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of community over control. The fences she once policed so fiercely became symbols of boundaries respected and rebuilt. In the end, the neighborhood didn't return to exactly how it had been before, but it grew stronger. We learned that healing takes time, patience, and a willingness to forgive. Sometimes, the messiest conflicts leave behind the most valuable lessons about what it truly means to be neighbors. The HOA board's reaction to everything that had unfolded was telling in ways that few expected. At first, they tried to maintain a careful distance from the escalating feud between Karen and me, hoping that the storm would blow over without dragging them into the mess. But as the incidents grew more serious, the fire, the soaked BMW, the viral videos, they realized that staying neutral was no longer an option. The board members had to decide whether to support Karen's tactics or to step back and try to restore some balance to the neighborhood. Some board members quietly sympathized with Karen. They saw her as the enforcer of the community's standards, someone trying to keep the neighborhood in line, even if her methods were harsh. To them, the fines, inspections, and complaints were part of the job, necessary to maintain property values and community appearance. They worried that backing away from Karen would signal weakness and invite chaos. So behind closed doors, a few of them whispered encouragement and offered subtle support, hoping to keep her campaign alive without making it public. Others on the board were deeply uncomfortable. They saw firsthand the division and anger Karen's actions had sown. They heard from neighbors who felt bullied and unfairly targeted. They worried about the legal risks and the damage to the HOA's reputation. These members pushed for a more measured approach, advocating for mediation, clearer communication, and a fairer enforcement process. But their voices were often drowned out by Karen's allies, and the board's reluctance to challenge someone so deeply entrenched. The conflict soon began to affect the board's own dynamics. Meetings became tense, with arguments breaking out over how to handle complaints and enforce rules. The board was no longer a unified group working for the good of the neighborhood, but a fractured body grappling with competing loyalties and fears. Some members questioned whether the HOA itself was contributing to the toxic environment. When legal threats and lawsuits started circulating, the board was forced to act more decisively. They commissioned outside legal advice and began reviewing their policies to avoid liability. Public statements were issued, emphasizing the HOA's commitment to fairness and community values. It was clear that the board understood that supporting Karen's heavy-handed tactics could backfire badly. In the end, the HOA's wavering response revealed the complexities of neighborhood politics. They were caught between maintaining order and protecting residents' rights, between loyalty and accountability. Karen's campaign had pushed the HOA to a breaking point, forcing everyone to reckon with what leadership in a community truly means. What began as a neighborhood dispute over trash cans and property lines soon took a serious legal turn. The soaked BMW and the fiery trash can incidents were no longer just stories exchanged between neighbors. They had attracted the attention of lawyers and legal threats that added a heavy weight to an already tense situation. Karen's relentless campaign of complaints and accusations escalated into formal warnings, demands for compensation, and even threats of lawsuits. Suddenly, the conflict that once seemed like petty drama was poised to become an expensive courtroom battle. When the first legal notices arrived, they were intimidating. Letters on official-looking HOA letterhead demanded restitution for damages, threatened fines for alleged violations, and warned that failure to comply could result in liens on property or even foreclosure proceedings. I was stunned to realize that I was being held financially responsible for the fire damage to the trash can and the mess left on Karen's car, despite the fact that her own actions had sparked the conflict. It felt surreal to be drawn into a legal minefield over something that started as a dispute about neighborhood standards. I sought legal advice quickly, wanting to understand my rights and the best way to protect myself. The lawyers confirmed that HOA disputes could get messy, especially when emotions ran high and rules were weaponized. They warned me that legal battles could drag on for months or even years, draining resources and goodwill. The mere threat of litigation created a chilling effect, making neighbors wary of taking sides or speaking out openly. At the same time, Karen's legal threats emboldened her supporters and intimidated those who opposed her. The neighborhood meetings became fraught with tension as residents debated whether to back away or stand firm. Some felt the risk of legal repercussions was too high and chose silence, while others organized to defend themselves against what they saw as bullying through the courts. The involvement of lawyers also changed the tone of the conflict. What was once a personal and community issue transformed into a formal dispute governed by contracts, bylaws, and statutes. Letters replaced conversations, and every action was scrutinized for potential legal consequences. The human element risked being lost in a sea of paperwork and court dates. This new phase of the battle was exhausting and uncertain. While the outcome remained unclear, one thing was certain: the neighborhood feud had moved far beyond trash cans and property lines. It was now a high-stakes game where the cost of losing was more than just reputation, it was potentially home and peace of mind. The entire ordeal with Karen revealed just how dangerous a power trip can be when it goes unchecked. What started as simple neighborhood rules turned into a war zone, where the real battle wasn't over trash or cars but over control, respect, and dignity. I learned that entitlement can poison a community faster than any wildfire, and that sometimes the smallest disputes can expose the biggest fractures in human nature. Looking back, the price of Karen's obsession was high for everyone involved. She lost the trust of neighbors who once admired her dedication. Her reputation shifted from strict but fair to harsh and unreasonable, and eventually to someone no one wanted to cross. The neighborhood was left divided, friendships strained, and a sense of safety and peace shattered. It became clear that rules without compassion or fairness only serve to isolate and harm, but the experience also taught me something valuable about resilience and standing up for what's right. I realized that standing firm against bullying requires patience, calm, and sometimes a willingness to fight back in ways others might not expect. It's about knowing when to listen and when to speak up, when to compromise and when to draw a line. I found strength in the support of those who stood with me, and courage in the knowledge that fairness and community spirit can outlast fear and intimidation. Karen's story became a cautionary tale for the entire neighborhood, a reminder that leadership is not about control, but about service and respect. The community slowly began to heal, with neighbors learning to communicate better, listen more, and focus on what really matters, living together with kindness and understanding. The experience was messy and painful, but it sparked conversations that might never have happened otherwise. In the end, the biggest lesson was about balance. Rules matter, but so do people. Power can be a force for good or destruction, depending on how it's wielded. And sometimes the most important victories aren't about winning a fight, but about restoring trust and rebuilding connections. Karen's reign may have ended, but the neighborhood learned to be stronger, wiser, and more united because of it. It was a hard lesson, but one that made all the difference. My cleaning crew unexpectedly became the heroes of this whole saga, much to their surprise. They had simply been doing their jobs, keeping the property clean, managing the trash, and trying to stay out of the drama that Karen was so eager to create. But after everything that happened, especially the soaked BMW incident, they were suddenly in the spotlight. Neighbors started coming up to them with words of encouragement and thanks. Some even joked that they had saved the neighborhood from Karen's reign of terror. The crew members weren't used to this kind of attention. Most of them preferred to stay behind the scenes, focusing on their work without drawing notice. But this newfound recognition gave them a sense of pride and validation they hadn't expected. They had been caught in the middle of a neighborhood war and had chosen to stand their ground with dignity and courage. Their decision to push back against Karen's bullying resonated with many residents who felt powerless for so long. Soon, stories about their bravery began to circulate beyond just our street. Friends and family of neighbors shared the tale, and it even reached social media. People admired how the crew didn't just clean up physical messes but also helped restore a sense of justice. The video of the soaked BMW became their unexpected claim to fame, and interview requests followed. They spoke openly about the challenges of working in a community torn apart by fear and control, about the importance of standing up against bullying, and about how small acts can have big impacts. For the cleaning crew, this recognition wasn't just about fame. It was about reclaiming their dignity and showing that even those who are often overlooked can make a difference. They became symbols of resistance against tyranny, proof that you don't have to hold a position of power to fight for what's right. Their actions inspired others to speak out and stand up for themselves, helping to shift the neighborhood dynamic. In the end, the cleaning crew taught all of us a powerful lesson. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest message. Their courage reminded the community that true strength lies in unity and resilience. They weren't just workers anymore, they were the heart of a neighborhood reclaiming its spirit. After the chaos and division tore through our neighborhood, healing didn't happen overnight, but it began slowly and steadily. People started to realize that what we had gone through wasn't just about trash cans or a soaked car, it was about rebuilding trust and reconnecting as neighbors. The rifts that Karen had caused left scars, but there was a shared desire to move beyond the conflict and find a way to live together peacefully again. Community events became a crucial part of this healing process. Block parties and casual gatherings provided spaces where neighbors could come together without the weight of past grievances hanging over them. These moments were filled with laughter, shared stories, and the simple joy of being part of a community. People who had avoided each other now found reasons to reconnect, reminding everyone of the bonds that originally brought us together. The healing also meant addressing the wounds left behind. Some neighbors reached out to those who had been most affected by the feud, offering apologies and support. Conversations that had been difficult or avoided finally happened. It wasn't always easy. Old frustrations surfaced, and there were moments of awkwardness and hesitation. But the willingness to listen and understand was a powerful step forward. For many of us, healing was also about redefining what community meant. We learned that rules and regulations were important, but they could never replace kindness, respect, and empathy. We saw the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of holding each other accountable with fairness. The experience sparked a renewed commitment to open communication and cooperation, with many neighbors volunteering to help mediate and support one another. Karen, once the figure of fear and control, became a cautionary tale rather than a leader. Her fall from grace reminded us all of the importance of humility and the harm that comes from wielding power without compassion. While the neighborhood wasn't perfect, the lessons learned made us stronger and more resilient. In the end, the neighborhood's healing was a testament to the power of community. Even after the deepest divisions, people came together to rebuild what had been broken. It was a messy, imperfect process, but it was real and meaningful. The conflict left its mark, but it also created a foundation for a neighborhood that could grow and thrive with renewed hope and understanding. Karen's fall from grace was swift and unmistakable. Once the undisputed queen of the neighborhood, her carefully built image crumbled as more and more people saw through the facade. The same neighbors who had once feared her wrath now looked at her with disappointment and frustration. The power she wielded so confidently was slipping away, replaced by whispers of resentment and stories of her heavy-handed tactics. Her loss of authority was not just about public opinion. The HOA board, pressured by growing complaints and legal concerns, distanced themselves from Karen. They quietly removed her from her position of power, citing the need for fresh leadership and a more balanced approach to community management. The decision was met with relief by many, signaling a turning point for the neighborhood. Without Karen's iron grip, the atmosphere began to lighten, and people started to breathe easier. Social circles shifted as well. Karen found herself increasingly isolated, her previous supporters retreating as the reality of her actions became undeniable. Invitations stopped coming, and casual greetings turned cold. The woman who once commanded respect now struggled to maintain a semblance of influence. It was a dramatic reversal that no one could have predicted at the height of her reign. The damage to her reputation extended beyond the neighborhood. Stories of her behavior spread through social media and local networks, turning her into a cautionary example of what happens when entitlement and control go unchecked. She became a symbol of the dangers of abusing authority, a lesson for communities everywhere about the importance of fairness and respect. Despite the fall, Karen remained defiant for a time, refusing to admit fault or change her ways. But as the neighborhood moved on and embraced a more inclusive spirit, her place in the community became increasingly marginal. The woman who had once tried to dictate every aspect of neighborhood life was now a reminder of what happens when power is taken too far. In the end, Karen's story was a powerful reminder that leadership is earned through trust and respect, not fear and domination. Her downfall showed that even the most entrenched figures can fall when the community comes together to demand better. It was a humbling conclusion to a chapter marked by conflict and control, and a hopeful beginning for a neighborhood ready to heal and grow. The trash fire became a story that people talked about long after the smoke cleared. It wasn't just the flames or the damage that made it memorable, it was what it represented. That burning trash can become a symbol of the tension and the breaking point in our neighborhood, a moment when everything boiled over. It was retold at block parties, shared in online forums, and even brought up in casual conversations at the local coffee shop. The incident captured the imagination of the community, turning a simple dispute into a legend. Neighbors laughed about the absurdity of it all. They joked about Karen's fiery temper and the soaked BMW, weaving the story into the fabric of neighborhood lore. Children who weren't even around when it happened heard the tale and asked their parents for the details. The fire became part of our collective memory, a reminder of how quickly things could spiral when personalities clash and rules become weapons. What made the story stick was the way it showed the human side of conflict. It wasn't just about rules or property, it was about pride, frustration, and the need to be heard. Everyone could relate to feeling powerless at times, and the fire was a dramatic expression of those bottled-up emotions. It was messy, chaotic, and undeniably real. The story also served as a warning. It reminded everyone in the neighborhood that when control is pushed too far, rebellion can follow. It showed the dangers of letting small disputes grow unchecked and the importance of finding ways to resolve conflicts before they ignite. The fire was a wake-up call, urging neighbors to be more understanding and to communicate better. Even Karen's supporters couldn't ignore the impact. The fire and everything that followed changed how people viewed her and the rules she enforced. The incident made it clear that power without empathy could only lead to division and damage. It challenged the community to rethink what it meant to belong and how to balance rules with kindness. In the end, the trash fire wasn't just an event, it was a turning point. It marked the moment when the neighborhood realized that living together meant more than following rules. It meant listening, respecting differences, and remembering that behind every dispute are real people with real feelings. The fire burned bright, but it also lit the way towards something better. The ultimate twist in this whole neighborhood saga came when the cleaning crew revealed just how carefully their response had been planned. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act fueled by anger or frustration. Behind the scenes, they had been strategizing a way to push back against Karen's relentless bullying in a way that would be impossible to ignore. The soaked BMW wasn't just a prank or an act of petty revenge, it was a calculated statement, a way to reclaim dignity and send a clear message that no one should be above accountability. The crew shared how they had observed Karen's patterns, her obsession with control, and how she used fear to keep neighbors in line. They talked about the moments when they felt powerless watching her escalate complaints and inspections without cause. But instead of backing down, they chose to use their skills and resources to fight back in a way that hit where it mattered most, her image and sense of control. Soaking her luxury car with that unmistakable substance was more than just messy, it was symbolic. What surprised many was how precise their timing had been. They waited for the moment when Karen's car was parked and vulnerable, ensuring their message was delivered with maximum impact. They wanted her to understand that her actions had consequences and that the neighborhood was no longer willing to live in fear. It was a turning point, a moment when the balance of power shifted. This revelation changed how the neighborhood saw the cleaning crew. They were no longer just workers, they became symbols of resistance and courage. Their carefully executed plan showed that standing up to a bully doesn't always mean shouting louder or fighting harder, it can mean being smart, patient, and strategic. Their actions inspired others to think differently about how to deal with conflict and injustice. For Karen, this twist was devastating. The woman who had believed she controlled the neighborhood realized too late that her grip was slipping and that her opponents were more organized and determined than she had ever imagined. The soaked BMW was not just a messy surprise, it was a powerful statement that marked the beginning of the end for her reign. In the end, the cleaning crew's strategic move reminded everyone that justice doesn't always come from courts or cops. Sometimes, it comes from the people who quietly refuse to be intimidated and who are willing to get their hands dirty to protect what's right. The whole situation stands as a clear reminder that entitlement only carries so far before reality, and a well-planned cleaning crew delivered justice in the most chaotic way imaginable. Surviving the aftermath of such suburban warfare takes patience, and maybe a bit of luck. Keeping trash where it belongs might seem trivial, but in this neighborhood, it's clear that drama can flare up faster than any fire. The soaked car and scorched trash bins aren't just incidents, they're symbols of a battle fought and lessons learned. In the end, peace comes only when respect replaces control, and sometimes the loudest statement is made not with words, but with action.